try my best to share the screen. Are we okay?
You're showing your presenter notes as well.
Oh, sorry. That's just a moment. Let's see, one more time. Sorry for this.
No worries. It's a very fancy way of using PowerPoint, but it's a bit problem. You're still doing it. No, it's fine. Okay.
Okay.
There you go. Please go ahead.
So thank you, Beate. I will just quickly go through what I try to go through in this next 15 minutes. I really would like to make a short detour to sort of the rationale for my approach into this research sphere, and then moving on to talk about my research scope, and then presenting some of the first research I've done in this Futuring Nordics project, which is a literature study, and then some cues on what I think I would like to research on further going ahead. So it's easy to feel a little bit odd one out in this seminar when considering my background, but I will try to make a short argument why I believe this Futuring Nordic project is probably a perfect home for my research. This is, of course, the context that we have all been discussing so far today. Business is definitely not as usual. And if anything, there seems to be such a stretch in these new ideas that we see emerging from other areas of expertise and my own, so that it is understandable why people ask, what's design got to do with this? And I think the shortest answer I've been able to give so far is this one equation. I believe that there is an argument basically saying that sustainable development equals thriving business that somewhat equates to innovation, that somewhat equates to design. And what do I mean about that? Well, first of all, there is an obvious expectancy now that private sector and business is going to have an increasing role in solving our global challenges. Partly, of course, this is attributed to the fact that they have an organizational power and processes that could be quite vital for this transition, but also, of course, the access to capital and knowledge. If we were to think about the link between thriving business and innovation, I think that one is being pretty well established all the way back to Michael Porter, and which very much talks about innovation as a competitive strategy, which is the goal then is to attain sort of a competitive advantage. And circling further on, what is then the link between innovation and design? I think in many ways, what business proponents have been talking about is the design almost being like a motor, an engine that really can drive innovation into new areas of stretches. And this is perhaps most relevant where we see that value creation is moving from purely primary and secondary sector, whereas production of goods, and thinking a lot about these new models of value creation, like service, for instance, service innovation. And in many ways, I think the circle is complete now that we see also design moving into the sphere of public sector, where some even consider it sort of be the saving grace for increasing efficiency in public services. I think this equational argument is now in many ways being also adopted by a lot of the scientific community, almost understanding this like the complete marriage of sustainability and innovation. And of course, there's a lot to be said about this, but I think it also shows that academia is trying to operationalize. We were having these comments earlier on today. How on earth are we going to operationalize on these planetary boundaries? So basically, it means that design is going places. And what Ellen MacArthur Foundation told us that 80% of the environmental impacts would stem from decisions made in the design phase, that is environmental impact throughout the life cycle. But I would argue that that number is pretty much useless once we actually start to see where design is moving in now, where design is being to an increasingly degree used to actually design entire multi-level, multi-stakeholder systems. So for me, that was basically what drove me into writing a PhD about the matter, because if you think about it, this is a pretty challenging straddle for a designer to balance. And so my special interest here is what we now call design for transitions, which is of course stemming from a lot of the work done by the transition design movement coming out of a lot of systems thinking as well. So my PhD project then carries on this sort of interdisciplinary approach. And I thought it would be very interesting for me to start out by looking to the business literature to see what concepts, what understanding of sustainability are they actually applying when they're talking about these transitions into sustainable business. For me, it is quite obvious that the kind of concepts you use would somehow shape what kind of answers you can get from it. So this led me into my first research, which is the literature study. And I just want to say that I am, of course, carrying with me some research questions from the Future in Nordics group as a whole. And that this process has, by all means, been sort of a collaborative effort where I've had help from my research group. So we are sort of splitting up a little bit of the workload. And my contribution has mostly been in really making analysis of the articles. So of course, there is not a lack of publication somehow addressing sustainability in a sense. But once you start to look deeper into it, we would suggest that there is only a handful of them that are actually really addressing sustainability as a focus of the publications. So that resulted in us ending up with 70 scientific articles that we decided to go deeper into using qualitative analysis, trying then to see and map what concepts of sustainability or sustainable business that's actually being used or referenced, and then organizing them as best we could according to what sort of grouping they had, but also a little bit more about sort of sectoral affiliation, etc. So what I want to present to you today is some early findings. And one of the more obvious one is what you would call the dominant ones. What concepts of sustainability do we actually see dominate the literature? And quite a few of them are what I would call obvious candidates. If you think about environmental sustainability, it has almost like this catch-all nature to it. But I will argue later on why this has some more underlying implications as well. It's also interesting to note that sort of the number of times these concepts are being described, and certain of them almost being institutionalized to the fact that they don't even bother citing them anymore, which I also find to be quite interesting, right? While more advanced concepts, for instance, like the planetary boundaries, are always cited. There is a lot of reasons why we see sort of this dominance. Of course, something has to do with historical perspective. For instance, the introduction of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 and the 2009 for planetary boundaries. But if you also then look at what I would call like the sustainable business concepts found, then you, at least from my perspective, start to see some correlation that is interesting. So by far, circular economy and sustainable business model is what is being mentioned of interest. And of course, the circular economy literature could be, at least it correlates well with the massive sort of policy and research opportunities that came along with the EU initiatives starting out from 2015 and 2016. And So what then becomes interesting if you start then to see what concepts appear together with other concepts. So again, most of the things you see are as expected. You would expect to see circular economy being tagged along with concepts of environmental sustainability, of course, and it does focus a lot on natural resource use, for instance, right? But there are some interesting outliers as well. If you look at the column that I've been marking out here, that sustainable development goals are completely missing, linked together with sustainable business model and eco-efficiency. I would really like to dive into this a lot more to really see if I can somehow explain the discrepancies. But my interest is, of course, what are the implications of using the different concepts as sort of a fundament for your research? And I've been trying to make some sort of a simple taxonomy of some key aspects of sustainability, and then try to map out to what extent I feel that they are of high relevance or perhaps not applicable at all to these different concepts. And I've done this mapping both for the pure sustainability concepts mentioned, but also for what I would say is the concepts pertaining to sustainable business. And once I've started showing this around to business strategists, they become a lot more interested. This is sort of a comparison that for them is useful, it's interesting, it evokes debate on what are the concepts we're using. And this is now pointing towards where I think my continued research will go. Because this is just the beginning. This is perhaps what I would say it's basically like a baseline research for me. I'm now much more interested in connecting the dots, so to say, which is now the big part of my work. Why are we seeing these references being used? Who are using these references, and who are they references in the second and third level? So I think there is already an article 2 coming up. I'm just writing up the article number 1, where I'm much more interested in the relation between the authors cited and the concepts being referred to beyond the first and second level of referencing. Because there is a certain dominance of certain authors that for me, from my background, from the innovation field, I'm quite surprised by seeing. I even would argue that certain of these references are being misused or even misunderstood. And this is, of course, perhaps a sign that there is a lack of knowledge exchange between my design and innovation sphere and the sphere of sustainability and sustainable business research. So there's a lot to be concluded, but basically what I'm saying is that I need to widen my scope of inquiry, moving further into my own sort of area of expertise, and then going out towards the actual industry to see how this is reflected in the actual practice of the designers. So thank you. That was what I have for now.